Corporate finance practice problem using OneNote. Cumulative voting problem number 1. Get ready, it's time to take your chance with corporate finance. Here we are in OneNote. If you have access to OneNote, would like to follow along, you're not required to, but if would like to, we're in the icon on the left-hand side in the Practice Problems tab, then down in the 1713 Cumulative Voting Problem number 1 tab. Also note, when using OneNote, look at the Immersive Reader tool. Our practice problems will also be in the text area, same name, same number, but with transcripts. Transcripts that can be translated into multiple different languages and either listened to or read in them. Close in the icon. Information up top. We're going to go through the calculations, then on down below. We're looking at the concept of cumulative voting type of problem. We'll run a couple different problems with relation to cumulative voting. There are a couple different scenarios that we will come up with regards to cumulative voting. This one will be the more simplified one, which will help us to understand the concepts of cumulative voting. Then we'll get to a little bit more complex problems in the future. Notice when you look at cumulative voting versus straight or standard voting, it's supposed to and will be commonly described as a voting system that will favor the minority in a voting situation to some degree through the consolidation of the focus of the voting power in a more particular type of area. So, for example, if you had a situation where you're in the corporate situation voting for, say, the board, and the owners, the stockholders, are voting for so many people on the board, in this case we're going to say 5 people, then if someone had a 51% ownership, then and it was a vote for each of the 5 positions, you would believe that the person has the majority ownership would basically win on each of those votes. However, if you have a situation then where you got a cumulative voting system, basically will take the number of shares that are outstanding, in this case 100, multiply it times the number of people that are up for election, 5, and instead of forcing them to put their votes on each of the people that are going to be involved or each of the seats, then we're going to say that you can concentrate your votes into a particular area. And by doing so, by having that concentration, the minority can have some power to basically be able to elect some people in that situation, even though they're going to be part of the minority. So that's generally how it's going to be explained, the general idea of the cumulative voting. So also note that it's something that we're talking here about the corporate situation, which is commonly applied to the board of directors, but it could also be a situation in some kind of government appointment or something like that, where there's a voting situation that uses cumulative voting, or in a situation where there's a not-for-profit organization and you're trying to vote there as well. So here's our scenario. How many shares are needed to elect 2 out of 5 of the seats that we're imagining? These we're going to say the board of director type of seats, where the owners that are going to be able to elect for the board of directors. The shares outstanding are 100. So this is one common question that we'll have. How many shares do we need in order to be able to basically guarantee that we can get 2 out of the 5? The other question that will commonly come up, and this will be the second question, is if I have so many shares, then how many people can I basically guarantee to elect? Those are 2 common questions that would come up in this type of cumulative voting situation. The math related to them, to both of those questions, will be similar, so we'll take a look at both of them as we go through these practice problems. Now keep in mind, when we're looking for these 5 seats, we can imagine multiple people running for basically the 5 seats. And all we need is to clear the hurdle of getting the most votes to fit in the top 5. So we just want the top 5 to be in place. It doesn't really matter, in essence, if you're number 1 versus number 2. If you got the most votes, but as long as you're in the top 5, you're okay. If you were the 5th one in the line, well then, you don't have the bragging rights that the person on top did. They got the most votes or something like that. But that doesn't really matter in general, unless you're arguing that you have a mandate or something like that, right? It just means that you're going to be in the top 5, and so that's part of the strategy you want to keep in mind. So we're trying to consolidate our votes so that we can get 2 out of the 5 in the top 5. How many votes, how many shares would we need to do that? And just keep in mind, of course, that the shareholders are the owners of the corporation, and the owners of the corporations are going to be electing the board of directors, so that the board of directors act in a similar way as you might think of like a Congress or something in a government situation. They're going to hopefully act on the shareholders' behalf to hire management, like the CEO and so on. Management then is going to be doing the day-to-day operations and managing those. Okay, so board of directors, that's who we're electing. We're the owners, we're the shareholders. So we have this formula. The shares required is calculated as the number of directors needed times the total number of shares outstanding divided by the total number of directors to be elected plus 1. All of that plus 1. That's going to be our basic formula, and then we'll kind of see that intuitively, or think if we can think about it intuitively as to why it works. So let's do the calculation. I'm going to do it in a table type of format. If you're working in a book problem or doing this on a test, you clearly want to be writing this down and plug these numbers into a piece of paper so you can look at it from an algebraic standpoint, and a calculator possibly if you think you're going to have that on the test. But if you're thinking about it from just standpoint of practice, it's often useful to take these and be able to put them into a table type of format. So if you looked at something like this and wanted to break it out into like a table so that you can run different scenarios in, say, Excel, typically I want the numerator and the denominator to basically be in the outer column. I'll calculate then any more detail on the numerator or denominator in the inner columns. So we'll start with the number of directors desired. That's going to be 2, so we want 2 of them. So we're saying that's the question. How many shares do we need in order to get 2 out of the 5? So we got 2, that's how many we want. And then we're going to multiply that times the total number of shares outstanding, which are 100. That's how many shares are out there. And so if we multiply them out, that's going to give us the numerator of our calculation, which is going to be 200. Denominator is going to be the total number of directors to be elected plus 1. So the number of directors that are going to be elected here in our simplified problem is simply 5. So 5, so we have 5 directors to be elected. Then we're just going to add 1 to it, as it says in our calculation. That will then give us our denominator. 5 plus 1 is going to be the 6. We've got the 200 numerator, 6 in the denominator. That's going to give us our 33. Let's plug it in the calculator just for the fun of it. We've got the 200 divided by 6 gives us the 33.33. So 33 about there. And then we're going to take that and we're going to add 1 to the whole thing. So we'll add 1 to it. That's going to give us our 34.33 about. Now, of course, we cannot have a fraction of a share, so I believe we're going to drop the 33, the 0.33, and keep it at the 34, and I believe that's the reason why we've got this kind of plus 1 at the end. So we're at the 34, then we're going to drop the 33 in our example here. So now let's kind of intuitively think about that. So if you just look at that calculation, then that would be basically what you would do in a test type of question. We put this in place, and we would say, okay, in order to elect the 2 out of 5 people, we would need the 34 shares to do so. Let's go ahead and think about that intuitively now and say, well, why would that make sense? Let's kind of think through what might happen. This is kind of like a game theory type of scenario. So we're going to say, let's think this through. Let's say we have the outstanding shares that are outstanding, and that was going to be the 100 shares. We have the total number of people that are going to be elected. There's going to be 5. Now, we're going to have then 100 times 5. That's going to be how many votes are out there. Normally, you'd have to vote, if it was a straight or standard election, for each of the positions. But here, we're going to say you still get 5 per position that's going to be covered, but you don't have to vote for each one of the director positions. You can put them where you want, but we still have the 500 votes. You just now have more flexibility with them. Now, we're going to assume that we are the minority shareholder, because that's usually the emphasis with these types of problems. They're emphasizing the fact that the minority shareholder could actually get a couple people on the board, even by being the minority, by consolidating the votes in this way. So that's going to be us here. That's what the calculation we did, which we said was 34. So we're going to say we need 34 on the minority to get those 2. And we're going to say that we multiply our 34 shares times 5. That means that we're going to have 170 votes that we believe that we can use in order to pick up the 2 out of 5 of the people. So that means the majority then, we're assuming here that the majority then, notice we only have 2 nice little categories of groups. This is us. This is who we got. This is who we have together in order to pick up our votes. This is everybody else, which could be one person, but it could also represent, a group of people. Clearly, the idea here is for us to think of them, what would happen if they all consolidated together and tried to stop us basically from doing what we're going to do, what we want to do. And we're going to imagine the worst case scenario, which means that the majority knows what we're going to do, knows our strategy, and is actively trying to consolidate and block us. That may not be the case in reality, of course, because there might be a substantial amount of votes that aren't going to vote at all in an actual situation, and we might have a whole scenario of things that we predict could happen. But this is a worst case scenario type of situation where we're saying, what can we do to lock down these two people, even if, worst case scenario, the whole majority tried to block us or stop us. So then if we got the 100 minus the 34, that means the shares for the majority would be the 66. If they multiply that times the 5, that's the number of director seats, that's going to give us the 330. So we have 170 that we can use to pick up those two people. They have 330 they can use to try to block us. Now, how could they block us, or how would this work? Well, if we look at our actual candidates over here, we can say that, let's say that we have candidates here. And so we need 5 seats. We got 5 seats. Let's imagine these are the candidates. Let's imagine we have the A through G on the candidates. These are names of people, right? These are people that are going to be on the board seats. We're going to imagine A and B are our people. That's the people that we want to be elected. So we're going to consolidate our votes for our minority votes. We're going to pick them up. We're going to ignore the other slots, the 3, 4, and 5. We're not even going to think about them. We'll let the majority pick those slots. We're just going to give those up, right? And we're just going to put all of our votes into the minority shares for A and B so that we can try to guarantee those people to be on there. Also, just realize that if there was just a vote for each slot individually, then we would have no chance, because the majority, if they wanted to beat us, would simply win every position if there was if there was a vote on each position. The idea here being that we're going to consolidate our votes and ignore some of them and put our votes here on A and B. So how would we do that? We would take the 170 votes we have divided by 2. That means we're going to put 85 down on A and B and just give up these other 3 slots. You can do whatever you want with that majority. We're just gonna pick up these 2. And then the majority, if we're thinking, what can the majority do to try to stop us? Let's imagine they're trying to stop us. They want to kick one of these 2 off. They don't want us to have anybody on there. What they would have to do is pick up these 3 slots and one more. We'd have to have one more slot here that would be over the 85 to kick out one of our 2 people. So you can imagine then they could say, well, let's pick up these 3. They could try to pick the minimum amount of votes to pick up these 3 by saying 86, 86, 86 votes for these 3. Those 3 would then beat our 2 people. And then this last one, though, would have to win. And they can't win because the 86 plus the 86 plus the 86 minus the total votes that they have, which is the 330, mean they only have 72 left for the last one. In other words, they have 330 votes, 330. These 3, they want to beat the 85, so minus the 86, minus the 86, minus the 86 leaves them with only 72. This last one cannot get in there, can't get into the winning top 5, and so they can't really beat us out. Now, they could have a situation, you could say, well, what if they put 85, 85, 85? That would be a funny situation. They could do that. They could say, well, 85 plus 85 plus 85, and they would be at the 255 minus the 330, and they still wouldn't be in a position, in this case, to beat out the 85. And I think that's the reason that they have this +1 situation, so that you'll still be in a, even if they tried to go for a tie. In other words, if they said 85, 85, 85, and then for whatever, if that was enough to pick up this last person to be over 85 or even to 85, then you'd have this situation where you could have a 5-way tie for those people, and you'd have to look in the rules and say, well, what do you do in that situation? And it might well be, well, the majority wins in that situation because there's got to be a tiebreaker, which you would think would be the majority vote possibly, or something like that. So they could go for like a tie type situation, but that would be an unusual situation, and I believe that's the reason you got the +1. You got the +1 here so that it might cover that, which it would do in basically this case. But that's going to be the general idea. If we add up the votes then, For A and B, we're the only people that voted for them because we're assuming everybody else is going to try to block us, right? So they didn't vote for them. And then we're assuming that everybody else voted for their top candidates here, C, D, E, and F, in such a way to try to take out A and B. And so that means that the totals, if we add this up, is going to be the 170, the 330, and the 500 matching up top. Now, if I was to recalculate this, let's put this and try to recalculate these results in terms of the highest to lowest. Like, who would win? Well, you tally up the votes. Obviously, the people that have the highest votes are going to win. So let's take these votes and tally them up by the total. So if I retally these up by the total, then now you can see that C, D, and E are the top three. They're winning. And then we've got A and B down here. And so they're not winning these other three, but they're still within the top five. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. F didn't make it into the top five. So the line is right here. F and down, they're gone, right? They didn't make it over the threshold. These two did make it over the threshold, and that's all that matters, because it's not about who got the most votes. It's only about who cleared the hurdle. I mean, if you're taking a test where it's an exam and everybody gets a certificate, if you get over 75%, it's great that you got 99% or something like that, but you only needed to get over 75 to really get there. It's good you want to clear it with a good hurdle in that situation, but anything over the hurdle means you got the certificate, right? Anything here, if you cleared over the top five, then you're on the board, right? So you could claim these guys up top. They might say, hey, look, I got more votes than them, and they might be able to politically maneuver and say, I have a bigger mandate than these people down here that they didn't get as many votes or something like that. But that's a political type of thing, right? For practical purposes, as long as you cleared the hurdle, then you're on the board, and that's the idea. They can't. So although these two aren't at the top of the winning five, they're within the winning five, and that's the idea. Notice, of course, this assumes that you're in a situation like a board situation where you're not voting for someone that's going to be, the hierarchy of position. Number one is, a different role. You're saying they're all part of the board, and all you got to do is get on the board, and that means you got to be within the top five. We said in this case.